The rains had just finished in Nnewi when Adaeze Okafor came into the world, squalling and furious, as though she already suspected that this earth owed her more than it was prepared to give. She was born on a Tuesday, a market day, and the women who had gathered in the small maternity ward at St. Charles Borromeo Hospital said it was a sign. A child born on Eke Market Day, they said, would always be surrounded by noise and plenty. They were not wrong. From that very first Tuesday, Adaeze ensured the entire compound knew she was present. The Okafor family lived on Obioma Street in the heart of Nnewi, a street lined with mango trees whose roots had long cracked the asphalt, leaving jagged lines that the children hopped over on their way to school. Their house was a modest bungalow, freshly painted pale yellow every 3 years, whether it needed it or not, because Chukwuemeka Okafor, the children's father, believed strongly that a clean house was a sign of a disciplined family. He was a civil engineer who worked at the State Secretariat in Awka and drove home every Friday evening in a white Peugeot 505 that he polished every Saturday morning without fail. Their mother, Ngozi Chukwukwa, whom the street children called Mama Obi, was a petty trader who sold stockfish and dried pepper at the Nkwo market and had a voice that could reach 3 compounds away when she called for her children. Together, Emeka and Ngozi Okafor had 6 children, 6, and they fed them all, clothed them all, sent them all to school, and still managed to have something left over for the small generator that powered the sitting room fan during NEPA's frequent absences. They were what Nnewi people would call average, not suffering, not swimming, but somewhere in between, with enough dignity to hold their heads up at the kindred meetings. The first daughter was Adaeze. Then came Amarachi, 2 years younger. Then, after a gap of 3 years, there were 4 more: Chidi, Ifunanya, Obina, and little Nekechi, who arrived as a surprise when the elder ones were almost teenagers. 6 children, 1 bungalow, 2 parents, and 1 grandmother who visited every dry season and brought the whole house to life. For the most part, the Okafor children got along. Chidi and Obina wrestled and broke things. Ifunanya and Nekechi shared secrets and hair ribbons. But the oldest 2, Adaeze and Amarachi, were a different story entirely. Between them existed a complicated, crackling tension that had no clear beginning and seemed to have no end in sight. Like 2 wires of opposite charge held too close together, they sparked. It had started small, as most great conflicts do. Adaeze was 8 years old when her mother brought home a pair of white sandals from the market, simple things with a buckle and a small flower at the toe. She had put them on and pranced around the yard, feeling like a princess, when 6-year-old Amarachi had pointed at them and said, without any particular malice, simply reporting a fact, "Mine are prettier than yours. Mine have 2 flowers." It was true. Amarachi's sandals did have 2 flowers, but something about the way it was said, or perhaps the way the other children laughed, had lodged itself in Adaeze's chest like a small stone, and no amount of time had been able to dislodge it. Because Amarachi's things were always somehow better. Not because their parents loved her more, Mama Ngozi swore on this daily, but because Amarachi had a way of making whatever she wore, carried, or did look effortlessly beautiful. Amarachi was the kind of girl people noticed. By the time she was 10, the women on Obioma Street called her Nuama, beautiful child, when she passed. She had her father's high cheekbones and her grandmother's long neck, and when she smiled, the gap between her 2 front teeth gave her face a warmth that strangers found disarming. She was also infuriatingly useful. She cooked without being asked, swept without being told, and could carry a bucket of water from the borehole on her head as steadily as a grown woman. Adaeze, being 2 years older, felt that all of this was deeply unfair. She was the Ada, the first daughter. The title carried weight in Igbo tradition. It meant she was the pillar, the one who the younger ones looked up to. Yet somehow, Amarachi had stolen the shine. People fussed over her,
Teachers remembered her name first. Boys in the neighborhood kicked their footballs towards her compound whenever she was outside. And their grandmother, Mama Nuku, had made it embarrassingly clear to anyone who asked that Amarachi was her favorite. Mama Nuku, whose full name was Lola Chidinma Okafo, came every December from the village of Oguta, where she lived in a large compound filled with the sound of goats and the smell of oziza leaves. She was a stout, earth-toned woman who wore only printed Ankara and wound her hair tie with authority. She had 7 grandchildren spread across 3 of her sons' families, but everyone, including the woman herself, knew that Amarachi held a special place. She would arrive in a downfall bus from Onitsha Junction, her Ghana must-go bag bursting with garden eggs, cocoyam, and wrapped pieces of ofe onugbu, bitter leaf soup that survived the journey in a sealed Tupperware container. The children would run to her, all of them, but she would look past Chidi's outstretched arms, step around Ifunaya's wiggling, and reach for Amarachi, pressing the girl's face into the soft cushion of her bosom. Amarachi mo, noa o ma, you have grown again. Oh. Every time I come, you are more beautiful. God is showing off with you, my child, Mama Nuku would say. And Amarachi would laugh and take her bag without being asked and help her inside. And within an hour, she would have heated water for Mama Nuku's bath and served her a cup of Milo without anyone requesting it. Adaeze watched all of this from the doorway, her arms folded. Adaeze, come greet your grandmother, Mama Ngozi would call. And Adaeze would come, stiffly, with a smile she kept on the surface. And Mama Nuku would hold her cheeks and say, Adam, no, welcome my first daughter, before turning back to ask Amarachi if she had eaten. It was a small thing, a very small thing, but it was the kind of small thing that, when it happens enough times in a person's life, begins to hollow out a space where bitterness can grow. Growing up together in a 3-bedroom house with 4 other children meant that Adaeze and Amarachi shared everything: a room, a wardrobe, a mirror, a faith that their parents would eventually buy them their own things. It also meant that their arguments were regular, noisy, and often spectacular. There was the time Adaeze wore Amarachi's new church blouse to a school party without asking, and came home with jollof rice stain on the collar. Amarachi did not shout. She never shouted, but she pressed her lips together and did not speak to her sister for 4 days. 4 days of silence so complete that even Obina, who was barely 7 and understood very little of women's wars, crept around the house on tiptoe. There was the time Adaeze told Amarachi's closest friend, Blessing, that Amarachi had said Blessing's boyfriend was ugly. She had not said this, but Adaeze had watched with a flicker of satisfaction that she would not have been able to explain as Blessing arrived at their gate in fury. The friendship survived. Blessing had known Amarachi since primary school and trusted her, but the incident was noted, filed away, added to the growing ledger that Amarachi kept in her heart. She never retaliated. This, more than anything, frustrated Adaeze. How do you fight someone who refuses to fight back? How do you make someone feel small when they seem perfectly content with their own size? Amarachi would absorb every slight, every manipulation, every casual cruelty, and return to her natural state, cheerful, productive, kind, as though it had never happened. She cried sometimes. Adaeze had heard her through the thin bedroom wall, quiet, controlled crying that lasted no longer than 15 minutes. Then she would blow her nose and come back out and ask if anyone needed help with dinner. It maddened Adaeze beyond words. But it was not all darkness on Obioma Street. The Okafor house was also full of real laughter. On Friday evenings, when their father returned from Awaka smelling of car leather and the outside world, he would bring akara from the woman at Dinko Junction, and they would gather in the sitting room under the ceiling fan, all 8 of them, and eat and talk and argue about which television program to watch. Their mother would spread a mat and teach the girls to braid each other's hair. Their father would tell stories of his own childhood in Oguta, how he had climbed iroko trees and swum in rivers that no longer existed. These were the moments when Adaeze was most herself, before the jealousy crept in, before the comparison began. She was funny, sharp. She could do impressions of their teachers that left even Amarachi bent over with laughter. She was not without gift. She simply could not see her own clearly because she was always squinting at someone else's. And Amarachi, who understood her sister better than Adaeze understood herself, loved her, even through everything. Even through the borrowed blouses and the stolen friendships and the petty manipulations, she loved Adaeze with the complicated, resigned love of someone who sees through a person's ugliness and chooses to remain. She's just afraid, Amarachi once told Blessing during one of their evening walks to the borehole. Ada is afraid that there is not enough good things in the world for both of us. But there is. There always is. Blessing had shaken her head. Your sister is lucky you are you and not someone else. Amarachi had only smiled that gap-toothed smile and hoisted her bucket. The years moved the way years do in small Nigerian towns, slowly during the school term and then suddenly fast during the holidays, until you blinked and found yourself at a stage of life you had not quite prepared for. Adaeze sat WAEC, then JAMB, then gained admission to study accounting at Nnamdi Azikiwe University in Awka. She moved into a hostel and came home on weekends. Amarachi, 2 years behind, was accepted into the same university to study biochemistry. She did not apply to go there intentionally, but there were only so many federal universities in the state, and now was the obvious choice. Adaeze was not pleased. She had built a small, careful life at school, friends who did not know her sister, lecturers who praised her without comparison, a social circle where she could simply be Adaeze Okafor, the sharp, organized first daughter. When Amarachi arrived on campus with her single box and her genuine smile, and within 3 weeks had made friends with half of the biochemistry faculty and joined the chapel choir and started a cooking cooperative with 5 girls from her block, Adaeze felt the familiar fire start in her chest. It was irrational. She knew it was irrational, but knowing something is irrational does not stop it from burning. The summer that Adaeze turned 25 was the summer Mama Noko came in July instead of December, which was unusual enough that Mama Ngozi met her at the gate with suspicion on her face. "Mama, it is not December," she said, carrying the old woman's bag. "Has something happened?" "Nothing has happened," Mama Noko said, settling into the parlor armchair as though she owned it. "Can I not visit my children when I want? Must I wait for Harmattan before I am allowed to come?" No one argued with Mama Noko. She had buried a husband, raised 3 sons alone, and survived the kind of hardships that modern children read about in history books. She sat where she liked and said what she wanted, and the family arranged itself around her like furniture. She stayed for 2 weeks. In those 2 weeks, she watched. She watched Adaeze leave the house each morning in her pressed clothes, heading for her accountancy job at the small audit firm downtown. She had graduated the previous year and found work quickly, which was something, and returned in the evening tired and sharpened. She watched Amarachi, who had just completed her final year and was waiting for NYSC postings, cook and clean and help her mother at the market on Saturdays, and spend her evenings studying for her master's admission. But mostly, Mama Noko watched the suitors. It had started 3 months before Mama Noko's arrival and had not stopped since. The first one was a young man named Emeka, not their father's name, though the coincidence made their mother nervous, who worked at Zenith Bank and drove a Camry, and came to the house with his mother and uncle to introduce himself properly, with wine and kola nut, the traditional way. He had come for Amarachi. Mama Ngozi had served them and called Amarachi out from the kitchen. And when Amarachi appeared in the doorway, still dusting flour from her hands, the young man's mother had leaned forward and touched her son's arm as if to say, "Yes, this one." Adaeze had been in her room. She had heard voices. She had come into the sitting room holding a cup of water she did not need, looked at the young man, looked at her sister, looked at the kola nut on a tray, and felt something cold and quick move through her. She had gone back to her room and sat on the bed for a long time. Over the following weeks, there were 2 more visits. Different men, different families, same energy. Word on Obioma Street was that the Okafor second daughter was of age and was everything a man could want. Beautiful, educated, hardworking, godly, and she could cook Ede Ofe jollof that made grown men emotional. The compound gate was never quiet on Saturday afternoons. And Adaeze? Not one knock for Adaeze, not one family, not one inquiry. She told herself it was because men were intimidated by her career, by her confidence, by her directness. She told herself she was not in a hurry. She told herself many things in the dark of her room, things that sounded reasonable enough in the night, but fell apart like wet paper in the morning. It was during Mama Nuku's July visit that the Emeka from Zenith Bank returned, this time more seriously with his father, an elder who wore his red cap with the authority of a man who had earned it. They sat in the parlor and the conversation was clear. They wanted Amarachi's hand in marriage. They would pay the bride price. They were ready. Amarachi sat quietly through it all, the way a good Igbo daughter was expected to sit, not mute, not invisible, but present with a deliberate restraint. The young man looked at her steadily. He was not handsome the way film stars are handsome, but he had a trustworthy face, the kind you could bring home and leave there without worrying. After the family left with promises of a return visit, Mama Ngozi found Amarachi on the back veranda, staring at the papaya tree. "What do you think?" her mother asked.
"He is fine, Mama," Amarachi said carefully. "Fine? That is all. The man has a job, a car, a family with sense. His mother is a retired teacher. I know, Mama." "Then what is it?" Amarachi was quiet for a moment. Then, "Ada has not married yet." Her mother made a sound, not quite a sigh, something older than a sigh. "Amarachi, she is my senior sister, Mama. How will it look? She is 25, I am 23. How do I go before her?" It was at this point that the beaded curtain at the back door rustled and Mama Nuku appeared. None of them had heard her come from the parlor, with her iro wrapped firmly around her waist and her eyes sharp as broken glass. "So," she said, easing herself onto the veranda stool, "it is this foolishness you are thinking about. Mama Nuku, don't Mama Nuku me." She settled herself. "Come here, sit close." Amarachi sat at the old woman's feet, a position she had occupied since childhood. Mama Nuku placed her heavy hand on the girl's head. "Nwam, listen to what I am telling you, and hear it well, because I am old and I will not repeat myself more than twice. Life does not move in a queue. Do you understand? It is not butter shoe shop where you take a number and wait for your name to be called. Each person has their own time, their own season. The mango tree does not wait for the orange tree before it fruits. Are they not in the same compound? Are they not drinking from the same rain? Yes, but each one fruits in its own time." Amarachi was very still. "Your sister's time is coming," Mama Nuku continued, softer now. "But her time and your time are not the same time. If you refuse your blessing because your sister has not received hers, you will wait. And when her blessing finally comes and she is settled and busy with her own life, you will still be waiting. And then what? Your heart will be bitter. Your mates will be ahead of you. And the man who came now, with his red cap father, with his good family, that man will have found someone else, someone who did not wait for a clock that was not hers to wind."
She patted the girl's head once, firmly. "Think carefully, my daughter. Pray, but do not let fear of what others will say steal what God has placed at your door. You hear me?" "I hear you, Mama Nuku," Amarachi said quietly. The old woman nodded, satisfied, and reached for her snuff. What Mama Nuku did not know, what neither she nor Mama Ngozi had seen, was that Adaeze had been standing just inside the kitchen door the entire time. She had come for water. She had stayed for the conversation. And now she stood with the plastic cup pressed against her chest, breathing steadily through her nose, because if she breathed through her mouth, she might make a sound, and she could not afford to make a sound. Her sister had been about to accept a man with a car and a red-cap father and a trustworthy face. And she, Adaeze, the first daughter, the Ada, had not received so much as a single knock on the gate. She set the cup down very carefully on the kitchen counter. She went back to her room, and she began to think. Adaeze had always been intelligent. It was the one thing she had never disputed about herself. Where she struggled was with wisdom, with the patient, measured, selfless kind of thinking that distinguishes the merely clever from the truly wise. Cleverness she had in abundance, and she put it to work. She did not do anything dramatic. She was far too careful for that. She did not argue against the marriage openly, or throw herself on the ground, or make the kind of scene that would be talked about at the kindred meeting. She was subtle, precise. She chose her moments the way a surgeon chooses incisions.
The first thing she did was corner Amarachi in the kitchen 3 nights after Mama Nuku's speech on the veranda. "Amara," she sat at the kitchen table, stirring cold gari to look busy.
That Emeka boy, have you heard things about him? Amarachi turned from the pot. What things? I'm not sure, nothing confirmed. But one of the girls at work, her cousin knows him from Onitsha. She said he has a child somewhere, from a girl he was dating in school. Amarachi was very still. I don't know if it's true, Adaeze added quickly, staring Hagari. Probably not. Men like that, they can manage these things. Don't worry, he probably isn't a bad person. I just thought you should know. She stood up and poured out the gari and went to bed. The rumor was not true. There was no cousin from Onitsha, no girl from his school days, no secret child. Adaeze had constructed it from air. But it was enough, just enough, to plant a seed of doubt in a young woman who was already second-guessing herself. The second thing she did was befriend the young man's sister, who was a member of their church's women fellowship. Over a month of strategic closeness, sharing snacks after service, sitting together at choir practice, Adaeze casually mentioned that her sister Amarachi was very focused on her career and not sure she was ready for commitment anytime soon. She planted the doubt from two sides, above and below, like a farmer preparing soil for something that would never grow. When the young man's family came for their second visit, they were received warmly, but the conversation seemed to drift. Amarachi, uncertain, spoke less family than she might have. The young man picked up on the uncertainty. Young men of good family are often taught to read these things, and the visit ended with the clarity it needed. He came one more time. Amarachi told him gently that she needed more time. She said she appreciated his family's interest. She said many things that were true, but that together added up to a door quietly closing. He stopped coming after that. When the last suitor finally stopped appearing at the gate, Adaeze felt a relief so sharp it almost frightened her. It passed quickly, the way a flash of lightning passes, bright and revealing and then gone, leaving only the dark. She told herself she had protected her sister from a man who might not have been trustworthy. She told herself it was the right thing. She told herself so many things. Amarachi said nothing. She moved through the house quietly for a few weeks, helping with dinner, attending NYSC orientation. She did not speak of the young man. She did not seem shattered by it, the way Adaeze had perhaps hoped she might be shattered, so that someone could comfort her and the whole matter could be discussed and resolved. Instead, Amarachi talked whatever she was feeling somewhere private and got on with the business of living. But one evening, when Adaeze passed the room they still shared on weekends when she was home, she heard it, the quiet 15-minute crying, soft, controlled, like rain on the other side of a wall. Adaeze stood in the corridor for a moment. Something shifted in her chest, something she did not want to identify. She went to the parlor and turned on the television at a volume higher than necessary.
2 years later, when Adaeze was 27, a man named Uzochukwu Daike arrived in her life through the most ordinary of doorways. A mutual friend's birthday party in Onitsha, a white tablecloth, 3 plates of egusi soup, and an argument about Nigeria's power sector that somehow ended in laughter. He was a project manager, 41, divorced once, no children. Calm in the way that men who have already made their mistakes tend to be calm. He was not handsome by anyone's standards, short, slightly round, with a habit of adjusting his glasses before making a point. But he was present, steady. He looked at Adaeze when she talked, really looked, the way people rarely do. He visited Obioma Street 4 months after they met. He came properly with his elder brother and his uncle, with drinks and kola nut and obi, and he asked for Adaeze. The gate, which had been so quiet for so long, was finally knocked upon. Adaeze sat in the room while the men spoke, and her heart was a complicated country she could not fully map. There was joy, real joy, the deep, settled kind. There was also something else, a thread of shame she would not name aloud, not even to herself. It was Amarachi who sat beside her that evening. Adaeze had expected distance, or worse, politeness, the cold, performed kind that said, "I remember what you did." Instead, Amarachi sat on the bed next to her and looked at the ceiling and said, "Ada, he seems like a genuinely good man." Adaeze blinked. "You think so?" The way he looked at you when you walked in from the kitchen, like you were a thing he had been looking for and finally found. Men like that kind of looking, it is not something you can teach a person to do. It comes from something real. Adaeze was quiet for a long time. "Amara, don't," Amarachi said gently, not harshly, not with edges. "Just be happy. I am happy for you. Let that be enough for now." It was Amarachi who helped their mother tie the asoebi for the introduction ceremony. It was Amarachi who stayed up until midnight 2 nights before the wedding, ironing their father's agbada. It was Amarachi who held Adaeze's hands at the airport on the morning of the honeymoon departure and said, "Ne,
Be happy. You deserve to be happy. And she meant it. There was not a molecule of performance in her. She genuinely meant it. Adaeze cried in the car to the airport, not about the wedding, about everything else.
The wedding was quiet by Nnewi standards. 30 tables in a rented hall in Oka, a DJ who played Flavor and Fela, a small chair when the couple fed each other cake. It was nice, respectable, the kind of wedding that people called decent and well-organized and moved on from without lingering. Mama Anoku came from Oguta in a sapphire blue George wrapper and sat at the high table with the authority of a queen. Before the celebration ended, she found Amarachi standing near the bar and held her face in both hands. "You are next, Nwam. Your season is close. I feel it in my old bones." Amarachi smiled. "Your bones have been wronged before, Mama Anoku." The old woman pinched her cheek. "Not about this." After a wedding, the air changes. It is subtle at first, almost imperceptible. The compound still smells the same in the mornings. The mango trees on Obioma Street are still cracking the asphalt. The borehole is still 2 streets away and still slow. But something in the domestic atmosphere has shifted, the way air shifts before a storm you cannot yet see. And Amarachi felt it before she could name it. Adaeze moved into her husband's house in Oka. She came home for visits on alternate Sundays, and she came in the way married women come, with a slightly different posture, with opinions that carried new weight, with Tupperware containers of food she had cooked in her own kitchen. It was good. It was right. Amarachi was glad for her. But the visits, after a while, began to carry something underneath them, something that arrived unremarked and uninvited, the way moisture arrives before mold. It started with looks, barely there, sweeping looks that moved from Amarachi's face to her left hand, ringless, still ringless, and then away, as though the looking had been accidental. Then it graduated to comments, small ones, the kind that could always be defended as concern. One Sunday in March, Adaeze sat at the dining table while Amarachi finished cooking and said, to no one in particular, "I saw Chisom at the market. You remember Chisom? She finished after you. She is pregnant now with her second. Time is moving on." Another Sunday, "Amara, are you sure NYSC men are not your type? All these young men you see every day at the camp." And then a laugh, a light laugh, the kind that dared you to be offended. Another, "One of Uzo's colleagues was asking about you, but he said he heard you are selective, very selective. I didn't know what to tell him."
Amarachi carried these words the way she carried all things, quietly, inside, somewhere between her ribs. She did not show them to anyone. Not to Blessing, who would have raged on her behalf. Not to their mother, who had enough to manage. Not to Mama Nuku, who was old and far away. She carried them, and she prayed, and she went to work every morning. She had taken a lab technician position at a private clinic while she studied for her master's, and she put her whole self into the work of living, because she had learned long ago that the best response to other people's timelines was to tend your own garden. But there were nights. There are always nights. Nights when she sat on the back veranda under the stars that come out in Nnewi after 9 o'clock. Dense and numerous. The kind of stars that make you feel small in a comforting way. And she asked God the hard questions, not the polite questions, the real ones. Why not yet? What is wrong with me? Am I being punished for something I cannot identify? She was 26, then 27. She completed her NYSC in Plateau State, 13 months of red soil and cold harmattan air, and young people from every corner of the country thrown together by national policy. She made friends there, good ones. She learned to make tuwo shinkafa and fell in love briefly with a boy from Kogi who played guitar. But she came back to Nnewi when her service ended because Nnewi was home and she did not run from things. She came back and she enrolled for her master's at Esut, and she kept walking and she kept praying. And she held Mama Nuku's words in her chest like a core, kept warm by them. Your time is coming. Everyone's season comes. The mango does not wait for the orange. She held on to that. She held on.
One day, a fine-looking man came back to Nnewi in August.
His name was Chukwudi Okonkwo, though everyone at home still called him Chudi, and he had left for America 10 years earlier on a scholarship to study computer engineering at Georgia Tech. He had stayed for a master's, then a PhD, then a job at a technology company in Maryland, whose parents still mispronounced with cheerful inaccuracy. He had done well, the kind of well that people in Nnewi spoke about as casually as weather. You know Chudi, Felix Okonkwo's son, the one in America? Yes, that one. He is doing very well. He had come back for his father's retirement celebration. Not for anything else, he told himself. He had come with one suitcase and a plan to stay 3 weeks and return to Maryland before the humidity became unbearable. He was 33, unmarried. Not because he was difficult, those who knew him well would have laughed at the suggestion, but because he was particular about certain things, and the particular thing he was looking for had not yet appeared on his side of the Atlantic. He met Amarachi at his father's party on the second Saturday of August. She had come with Blessing, who had known the Okonkwo family through church. Amarachi was wearing a plain wine-colored George wrapper that she had tied herself. No stylist, no makeup artist, just her own hands and her mother's mirror. And she was carrying a covered dish of ofada rice she had made because she could never arrive at a party empty-handed. Chudi saw her from across the room. He saw the way she navigated the crowded hall without bumping into anyone, as though she moved with an awareness of the space around her. He saw her laugh at something an older woman said, a genuine laugh, eyes creased, head back. He saw her take the older woman's empty plate and replace it with a fresh one, without being asked and without appearing to think about it. He asked Felix Jr., his cousin, who she was. Amarachi Okafo, Felix Jr. said, Emeka the engineer's daughter. The second daughter, the fine one. The fine one, Chudi repeated, and it sounded like a fact he was filing away carefully. They talked for 2 hours that evening. Not the way people talk at parties, in fragments and interruptions, with one eye on the next conversation, but properly. He asked her about her research. She was studying lipid oxidation pathways in stored blood samples for her master's thesis, and she explained it without dumbing it down, and he followed with questions that proved he was listening. She asked him about Maryland. He talked about the cold winters, the traffic on the I-495, the particular loneliness of building a life in a country that was not quite yours but had become familiar. Do you miss here? She asked. He thought about it. I miss the way people know each other here, he said finally. There, everyone is very polite, very professional, but you can go months without anyone truly seeing you. Here, he paused looking around the noisy room. Here people see you, sometimes too well, but they see you. Amarachi smiled. That is the most honest thing anyone has said at this party. He laughed. The laugh reached his eyes. He visited the Okafo compound 4 days later. Not with his family, not yet. Just himself, in a clean shirt and simple trousers, carrying a bottle of wine and a small tin of chin-chin from the market at the junction. Because he had asked someone what you bring when you come to visit a family for the first time, and they had said, something small, something that shows you are not there to impress, just to see. He spent an hour with their father in the parlor, talking about civil engineering and infrastructure and the state of Nigerian roads. He helped their mother carry a bag of rice from the car to the kitchen without being asked. He sat with the younger ones, Chidi, Obina, little Nekechi who was now a teenager, and answered their questions about America with patience and humor and without condescension. Amarachi brought him a cup of zubu and sat in the chair across from him, and they talked again. And again it was easy, easier even than the first time. He came back 2 days later, then again. The compound began to expect him, the way it expects a thing that has established its rhythm. On his 8th visit, he brought his mother. There is no sound in an Igbo compound quite like the sound of a family visit with serious intentions. The careful rearranging of furniture, the sudden appearance of the best glasses, the hushed, urgent instruction. Go and change that dress, not that one, the other one. And where is your father? Mama Nguzi received them in the parlor with all the careful dignity of a woman who had been waiting for this moment for years and had decided she would not let it see her panic. Their father came from the bedroom in a fresh agbada that smelled of camphor and recent ironing. Little Nkechi was sent to buy cold drinks from the shop at the corner. Chudi's mother was a small, soft-spoken woman with silver at her temples and eyes that noticed everything. She sat with her handbag on her lap and looked at Amarachi, the way you look at a house you are considering buying. Not critically, but thoroughly, thoughtfully. "We did not come to do everything today," she said, after the drinks were shared and the kola nut blessed and the introduction settled. "But we wanted you to know our intentions. My son has spoken to us about your daughter, about Amarachi. We are Okonkwo family. You know us. Your husbands have greeted each other at Umuna meetings. We are not strangers. We have come to say that we see your daughter, and we come in peace." Emeka Okafor received the words with the measured grace of a man who had raised 6 children and still had enough faith left to believe that good things happen. "Your family is known to us," he said. "Felix Okonkwo and I were in the same kindred before he moved. If this is what God has written, we receive it with open hands." He looked at Amarachi. She had not said a word during the visit. It was not her place, not yet. But she met her father's gaze and gave him the smallest nod. He smiled. He cleared his throat. He looked at the ceiling for a moment with the expression of a man having a private conversation. "We receive you. Come back with your full family. We will talk properly."
Adaeze heard about the visits on Sunday. She heard about them from Ifunanya, her younger sister, who called her in Auka with a voice vibrating with excitement. "Ada, you haven't heard. There is a man coming to see Amara, a doctor or engineer or something. He is in America. He is very fine. Mama is over the moon. You need to come this Sunday." Adaeze sat very still on her sitting room sofa. "Who is he?" she asked. Her voice was its usual even tone. She had long ago learned to keep things off her face, off her voice. "Okonkwo family, Felix Okonkwo's son, the one in America. You know them now." She knew them. She sat for a long time after the call. Her husband was in the bedroom watching football. She could hear the commentator's voice and the occasional burst of reaction from the television. She sat on the sofa in the quiet sitting room, and she thought, was this it? Was this Amarachi's season, arriving in a clean shirt with chin-chin from the market? She should have felt something generous, some version of herself that she occasionally glimpsed, the better version, the one that had cried on the way to her honeymoon, the one that sometimes felt the old shame at what she had done to the Emeka from Zenith Bank. That version should have been able to straighten up and feel glad. But the old fire stirred. Small and stubborn, she had thought that marriage would extinguish it. She had thought that getting what she had always wanted would quiet the voice inside that measured and compared and kept score. It had not. The fire had simply banked. It had waited. And now her sister was getting a man from America. She went to Nnewi the following Sunday. Chudi was there when she arrived. He stood to greet her, tall with a calm, unhurried manner, and Adaeze assessed him in the 3 seconds she had before social decency required her to smile. He was composed, well-dressed without effort. He looked at Amarachi the same way Amarachi's mother looked at her youngest when she thought no one was watching, with a specific private tenderness. Adaeze shook his hand. "Welcome," she said. She was perfectly cordial. After he left that evening, she found Amarachi alone in the kitchen, rinsing dishes. She stood in the doorway. "He seems nice," she said. Amarachi looked up. "He is," she said. A pause. "Are you okay, Ada?" The question caught her off guard. She had expected defense or wariness, or the careful emotional distance that their history warranted. Not a question. Not that question. "I'm fine," Adaeze said. "Good," Amarachi said. Simply. She turned back to the dishes. Adaeze went back to the parlor.
She sat with her husband, who was talking to her father, and she thought about what she could do. The thought arrived before she had invited it. It arrived the way old habits arrive, automatically, through muscle memory. What could she do? And then a second thought arrived, quieter than the first. What kind of person do you want to be? It was not a voice she recognized exactly. It was perhaps her own voice, but older somehow. The version of her that existed on the other side of all the things she was still carrying. She sat with both thoughts, the new one and the old one. And she felt, for the first time in many years, how exhausting it was to maintain the old one. She drove back to Oka that night in silence. Her husband, who had learned to read her silences, turned off the car radio and let her be. Somewhere on the expressway, with the night rushing past and the headlights of oncoming trucks briefly illuminating her face, Adaeze Okafor made a quiet decision. Not a dramatic one, not the kind that required a ceremony or a confession, or a dramatic scene by a kitchen sink. Just a small, private turning, the kind that happens inside a person when they are finally tired enough of being who they have been. She decided to let her sister be happy. Not to perform happiness for her, not to manage happiness for her, simply to step aside and let Amarachi's season be Amarachi's. It was the hardest thing she had ever decided, and she was not sure she would be perfect at it, but she decided. The wine-carrying ceremony was held on a Saturday in November. Mama Nuku came from Oguta, this time without anyone needing to call her. She arrived the previous Wednesday with her Ghana Moscow bag and her Ankara and her snuff tin and her opinions, and she sat in the parlor like she had been appointed chairwoman of proceedings. "I told you," she said to Amarachi within the first 20 minutes of her arrival. "Did I not tell you? My bones know things." "Your bones told you," Amarachi confirmed, laughing. "Do not laugh. Respect the bones." The house on Obioma Street had not seen this kind of activity since Adaeze's own introduction, and even then, it had been a quieter affair. Now the compound was full from morning, women from the Women's Fellowship helping with cooking, men from the kindred rearranging chairs, Nkechi and her secondary school friends stringing colored lights along the veranda. The Okonkwo family arrived at 2 o'clock in a convoy of 5 cars, uncles and aunties and cousins and friends, some of whom had flown in from Lagos and Abuja, and one who had come all the way from London. They came with drinks, palm wine in white gourds, juice in cartons, imported wine, cold minerals. They came with envelopes. They came with noise and laughter and the kind of abundant energy that announces itself before the cars even stop. Trudy's father, Felix Okonkwo, presented the items one by one, and the Okafor family received them with the dignity the occasion demanded. The elders spoke in Igbo, the deep, uncompromising Igbo of men who learned the language from men who had never spoken English, and the proverbs fell like stones in a still river. Then came the wine carrying.
The young women of the compound brought Amarachi out. She had been waiting in the bedroom, dressed in burgundy george with gold zari thread, her hair pinned and gathered and decorated with small gold pins that Blessing had spent an hour placing carefully. She was composed on the surface. Underneath, her heart was a ceremony of its own. She came out holding the cup of palm wine. The yard was full of faces. Her father's face, proud and overwhelmed. Her mother's, with tears she had promised herself she would not cry. Mama Nuku, who looked as though she had personally arranged this outcome with God and was satisfied with the execution. Chidi, grinning. Obina, taking photos on his phone. Nkechi, dancing already before the music had started. And Adaeze. Adaeze stood at the edge of the gathering, her husband beside her, wearing a green blouse that she had borrowed from Amarachi without asking, but this time differently. This time she had asked. She watched her sister move through the crowd, and the expression on her face was something she would have found impossible to manufacture had she been pretending. It was real. Whatever she had decided on the expressway 6 weeks earlier had taken root, because the look on her face was genuine gladness. Not perfect, not without shadow, but real. Amarachi found Chudi in the crowd, which was the point, which was the whole ancient point of the wine carrying, and she stood before him and offered the cup. He took it, drank. The compound erupted. Amarachi felt the sound go through her body like a wave. She heard her father's voice rise above the noise. She heard Mama Nuku's, Chukwu Dalu, God be praised. She felt Chudi's hand find hers, quietly, under all that noise. She looked up at him. "Are you ready for what comes next?" he asked, over the noise, just for her. She thought of the years, the suitors who had come and gone, the passive comments at the dining table, the quiet 15-minute cries through the bedroom wall, the back veranda and the stars, and the questions she had asked God at night. She thought of Mama Nuku's words, worn smooth by all the times she had turned them over. Everyone's season comes.
She smiled, the gap-toothed smile, the one that had made strangers feel they had known her for years. "I have been ready," she said. "I was just waiting for you."
The wedding was set for April. Nnewi, which has never done anything quietly, which is a town constitutionally incapable of half measures, prepared itself. The Okonkwo family rented the largest hall in the town. They brought in a caterer from Lagos. They flew in a band from Enugu who played high life the way high life was meant to be played, loud and joyful and slightly dangerous, the kind of music that makes elderly uncles forget their knee problems and get to their feet. They hired a decorator who lined the hall in gold and burgundy and ivory and hung organza from the ceiling in cascading layers that made the space look like the inside of a prayer. On the morning of the wedding, Adaeze came early to Obioma Street to help. She came with her hands and her time and her silence. No passive comments, no sweeping looks at left hands. She tied wrappers and helped Mama Ngozi into her outfit, and when Amarachi emerged from the bedroom in her white gown, a simple thing, draped, with a long train that Nkechi was assigned to hold, Adaeze stopped talking mid-sentence. She just looked at her sister. Amarachi looked back, and in that look was everything that had passed between them. The borrowed sandals, the crying through the wall, the suitors who stopped coming, the Sunday passive comments, the long, complicated road of two sisters growing up in the same house with different seasons. Ada, Amarachi said. You are beautiful, Adaeze said. Her voice was steady. You have always been beautiful, and you deserve every bit of this. She said it without qualification, without but, without anything after it except silence. Amarachi crossed the room and held her sister, not lightly, the full kind of holding, with both arms, the kind they had not managed since they were children, small enough to share a single blanket. We are going to be fine, Amarachi murmured into her shoulder. Both of us, we always were. The wedding was everything Nnewi speaks about for years after the event. The spraying began at the couple's first dance and did not stop. Money fell in sheets, naira and dollars, because Chudi's American friends came and they did not know restraint. The guests gathered around the dance floor in circles, waving their naira the way crowds wave flags, the music from the High Life Band a living, breathing thing inside the hall. Mama Nuku was helped to the floor by her two favorite grandchildren, Amarachi and Kechi, and she danced in the middle of the spring with the authority of a woman who had earned every celebration she would ever attend for the rest of her life. The crowd cheered. Money flew around her like confetti. Gifts arrived on a separate table. Wrappers, cookware, electronics in refrigerator, a television, envelopes so fat they strained their rubber bands. The couple sat on the high table and received it all with the grace of people who understood that it was not about the things, it was about what the things represented: community, witness, blessing made visible. Chudi's best man gave a speech that made the women in the room cry and the men laugh uncomfortably and then laugh properly. Chudi's mother spoke in Igbo and in English and ended by telling Amarachi, "You are our daughter now, all of you, not just the parts that are convenient." Then the groom's father called for quiet. Felix Okonkwo was not a man given to long speeches. He rose, adjusted his red cap, and said simply, "My son traveled very far to find what he needed. We waited, we prayed, and God brought him home to find it right here in the family of our neighbor, our kinsman Emeka Okafor. When God is writing a story, he does not make mistakes. He just makes you wait for the right chapter." He sat down. The hall was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then the band started again, and the noise and the joy and the money resumed, and it did not stop until the sun had fully set and the stars came out over Nnewi, dense and numerous, the same stars Amarachi had asked her quiet questions under, and the compound outside the hall smelled of jollof rice and possibility.
Amarachi and Chudi left for Maryland 3 weeks after the wedding. The departure at the airport was the kind of scene that Obioma Street would speak about in hushed voices. Mama Ngozi, who had sworn she would not cry, crying. Their father, who stood very still with his hands clasped in front of him, because he had decided that morning that he would be the composed one and intended to honor the decision, even as his eyes betrayed him. Mama Nuku, who had come from Oguta specially, placed her hand on Amarachi's head at the departure gate and said nothing at all. Just pressed her hand there, long and firm, the way a person seals a blessing. Nkechi wept openly and did not try to hide it. Adaeze was the last. She held both of her sister's hands. She thought of many things she could say. She thought of apologies she had never formally made and perhaps would never formally make, because they were the kind that happened in gestures, not words. She thought of sandals with 1 flower and sandals with 2. She thought of 15 minutes of crying through a wall. She said, "Call me when you land." Amarachi said, "I will." Then she was gone through the departure gate with her husband, carrying the particular posture of a woman who knows exactly who she is and where she is going. In Maryland, in the winter months, when the cold pressed against the windows and the streets were salted white, Amarachi would sometimes stand in the kitchen of their apartment making egusi soup from scratch, grinding the seeds herself, because the pre-ground kind was not the same, and she had decided she would not compromise on egusi. And she would think of the back veranda on Obioma Street. She thought of the stars, of Mama Nuku's heavy hand on her head, of her father's quiet pride, of Adaeze's hands holding hers at the gate. She thought of all the seasons she had waited through, and understood now that she was standing in this one, that none of them had been wasted. The Emeka from Zenith Bank, the quiet manipulations, the passive Sundays, the 15-minute cries, all of it had built something in her, a particular kind of stillness, the kind that does not need approval to know it is worthy, the kind that can wait without becoming bitter, endure without becoming hard, love without losing itself. She thought that perhaps this was the real inheritance Mama Nuku had given her, not the words, though the words were good, but the example, an old woman who had weathered everything life had offered, good and difficult alike, and had arrived at 78, still dancing in the middle of a money spray, still pinching cheeks, still certain in her bones that seasons come. On Obioma Street, things continued their ordinary way. Mama Ngozi still sold stockfish at Nkwo Market. Their father still polished the pijo on Saturday mornings. Chidi was finishing his degree in Enugu. Obina had discovered football management and spent his evenings watching tactical analysis on YouTube. Nkechi was preparing for WAEC. The mango trees were still cracking the asphalt. The borehole was still slow. And Adaeze was learning something difficult and worthwhile. She was learning that comparison is a room with no windows. You can stay in it your whole life and never feel air. She was learning that her sister's abundance had never been her scarcity. That the world, contrary to everything her jealousy had told her, had not been keeping a finite stock of blessings with a system for who got which and how many. She was learning slowly, imperfectly, but she was learning. On the first Sunday of every month, she and her husband made the drive from Awaka to Nomi, and she sat at the dining table where she had once made passive comments about ringless fingers, and she ate her mother's ofiaku and listened to her father's stories and called Amarachi on video call so they could all share the table across the Atlantic. Amarachi's face in the video was bright, full. "How is Maryland?" Mama Ngozi would always ask first. "Cooled," Amarachi always answered, "but we are warm inside."
And then the table would fill with everyone talking at once. Nkechi and Obina arguing, their father inserting a proverb that silenced them briefly, their mother threatening no one in particular about finishing the food. And through the small rectangle of the phone screen, Amarachi and Chudi would watch it and laugh. And Adaeze would watch them watching it, and she would feel something she did not have a precise word for. Gratitude, perhaps. The specific gratitude of someone who almost ruined something and finds, against reasonable expectation, that it is still whole.